Alright guys, the first thing that I want to talk about is the 10% year-on-year drop in sales in the Northeast region. Mr. Stark, as our Chief Marketing Officer, what's your take on this? Mr. Gupta, I feel that a significant part of the accountability has to rest with Dr. Banner here, our Chief Finance Officer, given that he's cut our budget for marketing in that region by around 10%. Come on, Mr. Stark. Are you telling me that our return on marketing investment is so weak that a 10% drop in marketing results in a straight 10% drop in market share?
Fight!
Guys, let's not turn this into a dogfight. Let's objectively evaluate where we could have done better, both from a finance and marketing point of view.
It's much easier as well as far more enjoyable to identify and label the mistakes of others than it is to recognize our own. That being said, constant re-emphasizing of one's own mistakes can also make those around you question your credibility, especially in a corporate environment where the sharks have been known to eat the dolphins. As counterintuitive as it may sound, the key is to admit and be confidently wrong when you are. Retrospect and evaluate, but don't beat yourself down so much that you can't get back up again.
We also need to consider the fact that higher year-on-year inflation has reduced our customers' propensity to consume, and this is something that has impacted players across the industry, meaning that our market share has more or less remained the same.
Intelligence is not only the ability to reason, it is also the ability to find relevant material in memory and deploy attention when needed. Memory function is an attribute of System 1, the automatic side of our brain. Creativity is simply associative memory that works really well. The more you know and the more you remember, the more eureka moments you'll have.
However, it is also important to note that Thanos Limited, one of our competitors, has actually grown their market share over this past 1 year by improving the efficiency of their supply chain. They're getting products out to customers faster and with a lower defect rate. This has resulted in them being able to capture more of the sales. Just like Dr. Banner here to bring up something quite irrelevant to this meeting, given that Mr. Colson from supply chain is on leave this week. Anyway, one thing that I can tell you for sure, Mr. Gupta, is that we need Dr. Banner here to loosen his pockets and ease the budget for marketing. Thanos Limited spends twice of what we do on marketing.
A deliberate search for confirming evidence, known as a positive test strategy, is also how System 2 tests a hypothesis. Contrary to the rules of philosophers of science who advise testing hypotheses by trying to refute them, people, and scientists quite often, seek data that are likely to be compatible with the beliefs that they currently hold. When the confirmatory bias of System 1 is in play, our mind will listen to anything and everything in favor of that argument and will go to the extent of willing to exaggerate the likelihood of extreme and improbable events if it supports that argument. If you ever happen to visit a courtroom, you'll notice that lawyers apply two styles of criticism. To demolish a case, they raise doubts about the strongest arguments that favor it. To discredit a witness, they focus on the weakest part of their testimony.
They're also twice our size. Exactly. If you want to make the big bucks, you've got to spend the big bucks.
Mood evidently affects the operation of System 1. When we are uncomfortable and unhappy, we lose touch with our intuition. In this scenario, we can clearly see that the CFO has some very valid points. A 1:1 drop in market share vis-a-vis marketing expenditure is clearly worrying. Also, it's fair game to say that the CMO needs to have a meeting with the Chief Supply Chain Officer to address the issue of lacking behind competitors in terms of fulfillment. But because the CFO has been all but berated by the CFO has lost the motivation to counter the CMO, which in the long run is going to be detrimental to the performance of both the company and the CEO himself. The loudest voice isn't always the smartest.
I think we should do our next product launch in Paris this year, right in front of the Louvre. Imagine the amount of traction that would generate on social media. A very creative idea, Mr. Stark, but we don't really have a presence in Europe at the moment, and it's not something that we're targeting for the next 2 years either. Don't you think it'd be more prudent to launch nearer to our actual customers?
When in a good mood, people become more intuitive and more creative, but also less vigilant and more prone to logical errors. When on a budget squeeze and a declining domestic market share, it makes absolutely zero sense to spend voraciously on an international launch, unless there's a strategic change at the highest level.
Creative out-of-the-box solutions are the way forward, boss. If you want to not only catch up to where we were before, but surpass it and reach new heights, we have to be willing to swim out to the deep end and try things that have never been tried before. What's your take on this, Dr. Banner? I think what Mr. Stark is saying has some merit.
The principle of independent judgments has immediate applications for the conduct of meetings. A simple rule can help. Before an issue is discussed, all members of the committee should be asked to write a very brief summary of their position on the topic. This procedure makes good use of the value of the diversity of knowledge in the group. The standard practice of open discussion gives far too much weight to the opinions of those who speak early and assertively, causing others to line up behind them.
Let's do a pre-mortem of this and circle back in tomorrow's meeting.
When an organization has almost come to an important decision but has not formally committed itself yet, Gary Klein, a renowned research psychologist, proposes gathering together a group of individuals who are knowledgeable about the decision for a brief session. The premise of the session is a short speech. Imagine that we are a year into the future. We implemented the plan as it currently exists. The outcome has been a disaster. Please take 5 to 10 minutes to write a brief history of that disaster. The main virtue of the pre-mortem is that it legitimizes doubts. Furthermore, it encourages even supporters of the decision to search for possible threats that they had not considered earlier.
Moving on, what are the latest projections on our new investment? There's a 90% chance that payback will be in 3 years, but a 10% chance that it will go to 4 years. If it does, the cash flow position of the firm will come under strain. That sounds a tad bit worrying.
To appreciate the asymmetry between the certainty effect and the possibility effect, imagine first that you have a 1% chance to win $1 million. You will know the outcome tomorrow. Now imagine that you are almost certain to win $1 million, but there's a 1% chance that you will not. The anxiety in the second situation, where a certain outcome has a slight chance of not working out, appears to be more important than hope in the first, where a possible outcome has a low chance of happening.
Guys, I don't think we can overlook the risk of weakening our cash flow position. The board and investors will be after our lives if that happens. I think we should go with the second project, which has a slightly lower return, but a more certain payback in 3 years.
When you take the long view of many similar decisions, you'll see that paying a premium to avoid a small risk of a large loss is actually costly. Consistent overweighting of improbable events, a feature of intuitive decision making, eventually leads to inferior outcomes.
Alright guys, it's been a long day. Bottom line is, I need you guys to get your act together and start earning your money. A declining market share, so much uncertainty over the payback of a simple investment, it's just not on, guys. So you can either shape up or ship out.
People who are cognitively busy are also more likely to make selfish choices, use sexist language, and make superficial judgments in social situations. Cognitive load is not the only cause of weakened self-control. A few drinks have the same effect, as does a sleepless night. The self-control of morning people is impaired at night, and the reverse is true of night people. The conclusion is straightforward. Self-control requires attention and effort.